Stop the $4.2 trillion echo that broke the CIA. The hum flips. Our tap, dead silent for hours, starts talking back. A millisecond late, twin rides the line like the cable is answering itself. Analysts cheer, clean starts, tidy teardowns, textbook hierarchies. But here's the twist. One tiny impedance mismatch in wet Berlin clay just handed Moscow a steering wheel. They don't touch the encrypted voice. They don't need to. They ride the echo and feed us ghost metadata for years. Budgets swell. Assets die. Maps of power redraw themselves around a lie. How did one oversight rewrite America's Cold War playbook? To see it, you have to go underground. Berlin, 1955. Berlin's wiretap dream. Picture it, a city cut in half, streets split by ideology, but under those streets, hot copper. After 1945, Berlin is a switchboard for an empire, and by the mid-1950s, those trunk lines pulsing out of East Berlin are the closest thing the West has to a heartbeat monitor on the Soviet machine. Voice traffic is locked in ciphers the Allies can't crack fast enough. But the patterns, the routing, the timing, the switch events, metadata, that's where the gold might be. If you can see who calls whom, when, for how long, you don't need the words. You see rank, you see readiness, you see fear. Here's where things get interesting. The British call it stopwatch. The Americans call it Operation Gold. Together, SIS and CIA hatch a plan that feels insane and perfect. Dig a tunnel from West Berlin into East German soil, splice into the Soviet trunk cables near Rudo-Altklinik, and listen without them ever knowing. The Brits bring finesse, patient tradecraft, quiet tools, a taste for physics. The CIA brings scale, money, manpower, warehouses of gear, and a hunger to be first. They ask a simple question with a brutal price tag. Can call pattern metadata beat encryption and pierce the Soviet veil? Nobody promises an enigma moment. That's not the play. The play is rhythm over content. If the Kremlin's voice is unreadable, maybe its footsteps aren't. Pilot taps, those little proof-of-concept tests, hint at dense traffic near the target zone. Enough signal to risk it. Green light. Crews go to work under a fake warehouse. Pumps run day and night to hold back the groundwater. Clay gets hauled, shored, and sealed. It's engineering as espionage. Ventilation ducting that doesn't echo. Cable farms built like cathedrals. Gain staging tuned so a cough in Leningrad shows up as a whisper in Berlin. And every meter forward is a meter closer to a political detonation if they're caught. Meanwhile, both services build walls inside their own houses. Need-to-know boxes stack up. SIS doesn't tell CIA everything about tool tolerances. CIA doesn't share full analytic methods with SIS. Compartmentalization is safety, right? Maybe. Or maybe it's how blind spots stay blind. Remember that. Why metadata mattered sits in the math and in human behavior. Switches don't lie about when they change state. Ringing current looks different than idle. High-rank circuits get priority during stress. Run those traces long enough, and you can build social graphs, edges and nodes that hint at who matters and when. You can watch alert levels rise before speeches. You can spot exercises by the way night traffic shifts today. You think you know the doctrine because the line breathes it at scale. Here's the twist. The West isn't the first one inside this story, not in the way that matters. Because while pumps thrum and the ceiling sweats, a British officer named George Blake is already sitting with the KGB, telling them exactly what's coming. He's an SIS case officer turned asset, recruited in the early 1950s. Ideology, prison pressure, pick your blend. He doesn't stop the tunnel. He hands Moscow a choice. And they make the cold, brilliant choice. Don't kill the tunnel, feed it. Let it live long enough to teach you how the West thinks. Keep the audio encrypted and clean so the purists nod. But salt the pattern layer, the metadata, until the model learns your lies as truth. Counterintelligence over time beats a clean bust every day. If they smash it now, you get a headline. If you steer it, you get strategy. So crews finally reach the cable run. Wet soil, lead sheathing, paper-insulated copper. Old lines, but tight enough to carry high-level traffic. The tap team slices in with surgical pride. They sweat impedance, match levels, and bridge without dropping the line. The first captures roll. On paper, it's a miracle. Streams of switching data. Busy hour peaks. Hierarchies shimmering into view. The buzz in Langley and London is electric. They think they've found a window into a closed city's nervous system. But wait, here's the twist. Under that clay, physics doesn't care about pride. A splice a few ohms off, an unshielded run that sits too close to a stray ground path, moisture turning the trench into a messy dielectric. Little stuff, the kind of stuff you wave off as line quirks, because, come on, this is East German infrastructure, nothing is lab grade. Those quirks are the seed of something lethal. In the analysis huts, doctrine hardens fast. People write sampling windows into code. They set cutoff rules that strip outliers. Early wins, perfectly timed exercises, clean escalations during crises, bake confirmation bias into the workflow. Production metrics climb, reports hit desks on time. The model looks prescient, careers attached to this feed. And inside those compartments, dissent is treated like static. Fix your thresholds, filter the noise, keep the charts clean. Across town, SIS techs jot odd notes, stable delayed replicas at fixed millisecond offsets, crosstalk whispers that look like switch events, echo bands that don't behave like healthy lines. Those notes don't travel far. Boxes are boxes, and the bigger machine wants a win. Meanwhile, the KGB watches. They don't have to guess the windows anymore. They know them. They can time ghost calls to our mornings. They can ride the tunnel's own reflection to draw perfect pictures we're proud to publish. They've turned our stopwatch against us. And that's when the hum flips. Not a roar, not a siren. Just a line answering itself right on cue. The mole and the insurance policy. George Blake doesn't look like a wrecking ball. Soft voice, polished manners, the kind of officer London trusts to sit in quiet rooms and make careful promises. But by the early 1950s, after a North Korean prison camp and a conversion in the shadows, ideology or survival or both, he's walking into KGB meetings and giving them the one thing they can't buy, our plans before we act. Here's where things get interesting. Blake briefs Moscow on stopwatch, on the tunnel concept, on the target zone near Rudo. He doesn't hand them blueprints scribbled in one night. He feeds them the cadence, the cast of characters, the tempo of British patience and American muscle. And the KGB faces a choice that defines the next few years. Do you burn the operation now and get a headline? Or do you let it live and turn it into a school? They choose school. Don't kill the tunnel, curate it. Don't break the line, learn the listener. That's the insurance policy. The KGB's counterintelligence people know something Western analysts often forget. Raw access is less valuable than shaping what the other side thinks they've accessed. So they design a failure that looks like success, plausible, rich, clockwork true. They protect the encrypted voice layer, keep it pristine so the cryptographers don't revolt, but they seed the metadata layer with theater. Not all at once, not a cartoon, just enough perfection to steer belief. To do that, they lean on two assets, Blake's drip feed about our method, and physics that doesn't need their hand every day. Because our splice isn't perfect. In wet Berlin clay, with paper-insulated copper under lead sheathing, tiny impedance mismatches throw reflections back down the line. A millisecond-late echo. Crosstalk windows that sit at fixed delays. SIS tech notes say it out loud. Stable delayed replicas, predictable bands. Inside Moscow center, that's a GIF. They don't have to hack the voice. They can ride the tunnel's own echo and nudge it. Insurance means predictability. The KGB needs our analysts to trust the wrong thing for long enough to make it policy. So they let true traffic run and layer ghost, switch, signatures on top when it matters. Carrier nudges, impulse trains that line up with our sampling windows. They couldn't do it blind. They needed our rhythm. Blake supplied that. How long we log when we rotate shifts, which patterns get flagged as doctrine consistent. The West is hunting for elegant hierarchies, clear starts and teardowns, clean stress arcs during crises. So the KGB amplifies those tells. Early flags flicker and die in compartments. A British engineer writes that certain bursts are too stable to be organic under load. A CIA analyst notices that exercises always telegraph neatly during Western office hours, which is odd if the Soviets are hiding things from us. Field reports from assets in East Germany say a dispersal happened, while the dashboard shows massing and sustained holds. Each time, production tempo and confirmation bias beat caution. Fix your thresholds. Filter outliers. Stay on schedule. From the KGB's view, that's the point. Insurance is time. The longer the feed feels correct, the more the machine inside Langley and London reorganizes itself around it. Career paths attached to the tunnel's output. Procurement memos cite consistent traffic shaping indicative of readiness doctrine. Budget meetings point to those perfect graphs and argue for satellites to see what the tunnel proves. Moscow doesn't need to be right every day. They just need to be right at inflection points, enough to push us toward the most expensive answers to problems they design. Why keep voice content untouched? Because content is volatile. A single decrypted call can blow months of illusion. Metadata feels clean, it's math-colored. It wears the glow of objectivity. If the ciphers hold, analysts tell themselves the pattern layer is the truest layer we've got. And once metadata is crowned as truth, the adversary doesn't have to scream. They whisper with timing. Get this, Blake isn't just reporting on our plans, he's learning our appetites. He hears which generals, circuits we're desperate to map, which ministries our politicians obsess over, which nodes our models elevate as center of gravity. So when the KGB stages a leak in East Berlin that accidentally aligns with a ghost surge, the West congratulates itself. Look at that cross-validate. Humant and SIGINT agree, except the human was nudged and the signal was echoed. Insurance goes beyond Berlin. In staff meetings, KGB planners ask the petty but crucial questions. What are their peak analysis hours? When does London's senior desk sign off? When does Langley's briefer prep the morning book? Then they schedule quiet periods. Lines mysteriously clean up during our peak windows, making our calibrations feel righteous. Outside those windows, noise returns, but we've already filed the report, so who cares? Here's the twist. The KGB doesn't need every Western skeptic silenced. They just need the skeptics trapped behind need-to-know walls. A compartment labeled physics anomalies, line health, sits 3 doors removed from strategic assessments, leadership posture. The note about fixed millisecond echoes never crosses into the room where call graphs steer posture memos. That's not an accident. That's how the insurance policy pays out. And Moscow keeps a final card, a public exit. In 1956, they'll discover the tunnel with cameras and outrage. By then, the real work is done. The West will spin that the voice take was valuable. The metadata doubts, buried. The culture, still in place. The insurance policy isn't just protecting one line, it's protecting a way of seeing. You think you know bugs, tapes, and lucky breaks. Here's the twist. They taught our sensor to lie to us, then let us teach ourselves to love the lie. The physics of betrayal, what echo really was. Let's crawl into the wire itself. Picture paper-insulated copper, wrapped in lead sheathing, running through damp Berlin clay. The Soviets, trunk lines on pristine lab builds. They're robust, old-school telephony, balanced pairs meant to carry a lot of voice channels with predictable impedance. Now, when you splice into that, you've got one job. Don't change the line the switch thinks it sees. If you do, the line starts to reflect tiny bits of energy back on itself. That reflection is the echo. Here's where things get interesting. Impedance is just how hard the line pushes back against the signal. If your tap adds a few ohms the wrong way, or leaves a tiny unshielded segment next to a damp ground path, you create a mismatch. In wet soil with stray currents and imperfect grounds, that mismatch becomes a mirror. Signals hit your splice, some go forward like normal, and a thin slice bounces back. Not seconds later, milliseconds. Fixed delays, tied to the length of cable between discontinuities. Now a healthy trunk should show a little noise, a little crosstalk, sure. But a persistent delayed replica at the same offset, stable across hours. That's a fingerprint. And those fixed delay fingerprints can trick simple event detectors. Because classic metadata parsers in that era weren't reading words. They were reading the on-off choreography of lines. Ringing, current, seizure, hold, teardown. If the echo rides at the right amplitude and timing, it can look like a second seizure event, or a hold that keeps reasserting, or a teardown followed by a clean start. You think you know, but the twist is in the soil. Moist clay changes the dielectric around the cable. That shifts the effective propagation speed and creates tidy crosstalk windows between adjacent pairs. Put an unshielded bridge too close to a stray ground return, and you've built a miniature delay line. Add in a slightly floating ground at the tap hut, and you've set the stage for stable reflection bands, millisecond space ghosts that don't drift much unless temperature or load changes. But wait, there's more. The KGB doesn't need to engineer every blip. They just need to learn the rhythm of our samplers. If our analysts take snapshots in fixed windows, say every few seconds to track starts and stops, the adversary can inject tiny carrier nudges or impulse trains that hit right before the window closes. They time a subtle amplitude bump that, when reflected, lands squarely inside our parser's decision boundary. The tool sees start, because the echo fakes the step change its train to count. Here's the twist. Voice content stays untouched. The cipher still rides fine over the top. Your ear can't hear the ghost. Your decryptor doesn't even try. But the metadata layer, where the machine is just watching edges, thresholds, and timing, that's vulnerable. An echo that repeats at 3.7 milliseconds like clockwork becomes a scaffolding for ghost calls. You nudge the carrier a hair, let the reflection paint a second edge, and the dashboard draws a node linking two ministries that never spoke. Meanwhile, the analysts do the thing analysts do, calibrate. They run line health checks in their quiet hours, when by design, traffic is low. The reflection is cleanest then, the echo windows are most stable, and the measurements validate the feed. So the tools get tuned to the very condition that makes ghost events most believable. During peak Western office hours, when briefs are compiled and charts get frozen, the tunnel's environment looks perfect, because Soviet operators also learned our schedule and cleaned their load accordingly. Our golden data lives in the dirtiest physics. Think about switch behavior. When a line seizes, there's a transient, an impulse. In trunk gear of the 1950s, those transients ring a little like a struck bell. Normally, you'd see a messy decay. But if your tap has a ground loop and a mismatched bridge, that ring can echo back with a neat, delayed bump. Stack a few of those, and your edge detector goes, yes, there's a controlled start. The parser isn't lying. It's obeying the rules you wrote. The physics is lying underneath. Unknown to most of the team, a few SIS techs actually bench-built sections of trunk to study this. In lab conditions, introduce a controlled mismatch and a ground loop, and you get predictable reflection windows. Feed in low-level impulses, far below voice audibility, and watch the metadata tools light up like Christmas. That's your ghost session. No decrypted word changes. The charts still tell a story, though, because the story lives in starts and stops. And that's the moment everything changed. Because once you accept that your stopwatch, your timing model, can be tricked by its own shadow, every clean hierarchy you proudly mapped becomes a suspect. The archive doesn't just contain recordings, it contains a training set your culture learned from. If the echo taught your tools what truth looks like, the lie becomes self-healing. You filter out the messy human stuff and keep the echo straight lines. Here's the kicker. The cleanest periods, the ones leaders loved, were often when moisture and load conspired to make the echo most stable. Perfect graphs, perfect lies. Physics didn't fail. We failed physics. Building the tunnel, building the bias. They didn't just dig a hole. They built a factory underground. Pumped thrum 24 hours, pushing back a water table that wanted to swallow the whole thing. Timber ribs creaked, then steel bracing went in. The air was damp and metallic. You could taste the clay. Every surface got painted with sealant because one drip in the wrong junction meant a ground path you didn't plan for. Power came in through isolated transformers. Lights ran on separate circuits, so a blown bulb wouldn't imprint on the line. Quiet wasn't a vibe, it was a spec. The cable farm looked like an altar. Racks on rubber mounts, copper bus bars polished like cutlery, patch panels labeled in 3 hands so no one misread a tag after a 20-hour shift. Gain stages were staged in inches, literally. Attenuators, matching transformers, isolation couplers, anything to make the trunks think nothing had changed. Engineers argued over a decibel like it was doctrine. They lined the tap bay with felt to kill reflections because someone swore a sharp clap could ride the metal and show up as hash. It was obsessive for a reason. One wrong impedance and the switch at the far end hears a different world. Meanwhile upstairs, The data doctrine got built with the same care and the same blind spots. Sampling windows were set early, fixed intervals, fixed thresholds, the clean, machine-friendly cadence analysts loved. The code that parsed starts and teardowns assumed healthy lines have messy edges, so too clean events were down-weighted as potential sensor artifacts. Outlier rules were hard-coded to bin anything that didn't fit the expected decay curves. It sounds careful. It is. Here's the twist. When your tap creates stable, tidy echo bands, your own hygiene strips the warning and keeps the lie. Production targets hung over the room, not sinister, just real. Metrics tracked daily summaries, weekly posture notes, quarterly assessments tied to reviews. You could get promoted for throughput and analytic impact, not for slowing a product because a ground loop made you itchy. So once the first reports landed and made senior people happy, those elegant hierarchies right, the workflow calcified. Dissent turned into an engineering ticket, not a strategic question. Flagged, logging, will investigate offline. Offline meant never. And confirmation bias did what it always does. Early wins set the template. When an exercise telegraphed cleanly and a later public event seemed to rhyme, the model got a halo. Any later messiness, human that didn't match, weather that should have bent load, got treated like the world being noisy, not the sensor being wrong. Analysts who colored inside the lines had green dashboards and clean streaks. Skeptics had footnotes and delays. Here's where it gets wild. The British did raise their hand. Tech notes from their side flagged repeatable millisecond offsets. They cautioned that in damp conditions, paper-insulated pairs can exhibit stable reflection windows. They suggested controlled outages and latency sweeps. Kill the line briefly, watch what comes back, prove the echo. Those memos got compartmented under line health and methods. The posture shop, the people drawing the big NATO-facing charts, never saw the physics note. Walls that keep secrets safe also keep truth from traveling. Culturally, SIS favored craft and forensics. CIA favored scale and momentum. That blend can be great, until it is. In this tunnel, the American machine wanted product. The British engineers wanted to keep testing. A liaison meeting tries to square both. Agree on a calibration block every night, right before the morning briefs. Sounds good. Except that's when Soviet operators later learn our schedule and lighten their load, which makes the echo cleanest. So our golden hours bake the worst bias into the tools. We validated the ghost at its prettiest. Human incentives added weight. A young analyst lands a chart on a deputy's desk that looks like a textbook tree of command. The deputy quotes it in a meeting. The analyst becomes the tunnel person. Requests pile in. Can you break out air versus ground? Can you isolate Warsaw Pact ministries? More asks mean less time to sanity check the sensor. Every minute partitioning nodes is a minute not ripping open the tap hut floor to remeasure a ground. Nobody's lazy. They're just rewarded for answers, not autopsies. Meanwhile, the build team kept perfecting. They re-terminated connectors, relaced cables, upgraded pumps. Each tweak made the system feel more professional, which perversely made the charts look cleaner, which locked belief tighter. A better-looking room made a better-looking line. And because nobody wants to be the person who breaks the thing everyone loves, the do not touch without authorization list got longer. Touch points froze. Across the line, the KGB didn't have to push hard. They could see our cadence through Blake and adjust their own load to make our windows sing. Tiny carrier nudges at predictable times, maintenance that just so happened to align with our calibration block. The physics did most of the work. They just kept time. British warnings circled back one more time after a noisy week, phase drifts, jitter bands widening with rain. The note said, our cleanest periods correlate with the wettest soil. Suspect reflection stability. It read like a paradox, so it got parked. The next week's posture note landed on time, beautiful as ever. And that's the core bias. The machine is humming, therefore we trust it. The hum felt like competence. The output felt like certainty. The tunnel became a mirror, and nobody checked if the face looking back was ours. The harvest, perfect data that was too perfect. At first, the graphs were gorgeous. Call graphs drew themselves like blueprints, clean trunks, neat branches, tidy leaves. You could trace a general staff spine, then watch subordinate nodes flicker alive in exact, staggered order. It matched what doctrine said a disciplined command chain should look like. Elegant, predictable, a little too predictable. Here's where things get interesting. Real networks breathe weird. They spike at odd hours, they cough under load, they smear when weather hits or when duty officers miss handoffs. These lines, they performed like they'd rehearsed for an inspection. During real crises, border standoffs, leadership speeches, test alerts, the metadata never hiccuped. Zero blind spots, no breakage, no flapping relays. The dashboards glowed like nothing in East Germany had ever been stressed. Analysts loved it because it read like confirmation. We publish a posture note showing escalation ladders with millisecond-tight step-ups, and a week later a public parade would land on a date our model hinted. Correlation cells. A deputy slaps the chart in a binder, says, "Keep running this." The glow of being right drowns the tiny wrongs. But the tiny wrongs kept stacking. Case 1. A Warsaw Pact exercise telegraphed 3 days early, massive pre-staging if you believed the line. Yet our field sources near the depot saw dispersal, not build-up. The unit rosters didn't move, the rail yards stayed lazy, but the tunnel said the switchboards were on fire. Case 2. Command bursts landed again and again inside Western office hours. Great for us because that's when the morning book gets printed. Odd for them because hiding from us means pushing surges when we're asleep. Each time the memo read, anomalies noted, likely deception on the ground. The model never accused the wire. And the wins were weird wins. An operation that failed on paper. Our graph showed a chain cut at the second echelon, still landed in the real world. A defector got out. A cargo reached its site. We'd write footnotes about possible covert backchannel routes, as if the Soviets had a secret switchboard that never hit a trunk. Or, and here's the twist, our ghost calls painted a fake failure because an echo hit our parser during a teardown and drew a clean break that never happened. Memo wars broke out in the middle floors. On one side, the tunnel faithful, pointing to months of stable hierarchies and textbook patterns. On the other, a scattered crew of skeptics with oscilloscope prints and hand-labeled plots showing echo bands at fixed millisecond delays. They mapped phase drifts to soil moisture. They circled jitter bands that shrank when our calibration block ran. They wrote lines like, "The cleanest sequences correlate with the most stable reflection conditions. Suspect artifact-driven session synthesis." Upstairs, that read like heresy against a flagship feed. Production pressure did the rest. Leadership wanted the win, not the warning. They just briefed allies on our unique insight into Soviet readiness behavior. They pointed at those lovely staircase plots, start, hold, teardown, in front of people who sign checks. You don't walk back certainty with a paragraph about impedance in wet clay. You say, "We're monitoring," and kick the physics can to a subcommittee. Get this, there was a tell nobody could ignore forever. During a live alert drill, our metadata showed massing across multiple commands, synchronized, clean. The human teams in East Berlin wrote the opposite. Units dispersing into small packets, decoys hitting the obvious routes. Our map had fat arteries glowing. The street had capillaries. It was the kind of mismatch you can't smooth with analyst prose. And yet, for 2 cycles, the tunnel kept drawing the same perfect surge, like the line was stuck in a beautiful loop. Another tell, the night before briefs, Soviet lines went quiet. Not dead, pristine. Background hash flattened, edge detection snapped sharp, echo windows we later found settled into steady state. Our tools validated then every time. The next morning our charts looked like carved marble. Meanwhile, after lunch, line health got messy, but the book had already gone upstairs. The day's truth got frozen at peak echo stability. A British paper, one of those early tech notes, resurfaced in a desk cleanout. It warned that stable, fixed delay replicas in damp media may appear as secondary switch events to naive parsers, and recommended latency sweeps and controlled outages before trusting any pattern claims. That memo had been filed under methods and never briefed to posture. When it resurfaced, it hit like a ghost postcard from the past. They'd seen the shape of the lie at the start. So why did the harvest look so good for so long? Because perfection flatters power. Clean charts make leaders feel in control. They reduce messy people into tidy nodes, and tidy nodes feel like decisions you can make on time. And because metadata had the math glow, no decrypted words, no human gossip, it wore objectivity like armor. We're not speculating, an analyst could say. We're measuring. Except the thing being measured was the shadow of our own tap. Here's the twist. The most useful periods for policy, those brisk, pretty runs we built posture on, lined up with the dirtiest physics. Fixed delays, narrow jitter, echo bands stable as stone, perfect data that was too perfect. Every rule in the parser had been tuned to applaud it. We de-taught our tool to love the mirror, and the mirror loved us back. Pressure built. The skeptics didn't go away. Field reports kept contradicting the dashboards, and then a drill bit back. The first break, a real war game goes sideways. 3 days into the drill, the dashboard sang. Starts, holds, teardowns, stacked like stairs across multiple commands. Our model read massing. It drew thick arteries from core HQ to air defense, from signals regiments to logistics spines. If you believed the line, the Warsaw Pact was tightening a fist. The morning book hit desks with a single sentence underlined. Posture shift imminent. On the street, it didn't look like that at all. Human teams in East Berlin watched trucks fan out, not converge. Units split into packets that slipped into side streets and woodland margins. Decoys rolled the obvious routes. Fresh paint, loud engines, just enough theatre to be seen. A rail yard that should have been a beehive was a slow Tuesday. From their perspective, the fist wasn't clenching, fingers were spreading. Here's where things get interesting. The tunnel feed insisted on synchronization. Across 3 ministries, edge detection snapped inside the same narrow window, gorgeous timing, the kind you frame. Meanwhile, a signals officer we trusted counted staggered dispatches and radio silences that didn't line up with any mass alert. He wrote, "They're avoiding trucks." Our map still glowed like a city grid at rush hour. Forensics started before lunch because nothing reconciled. The tap timing said seizure at 09:12:07, then a clean hold. Switch logs we'd scraped weeks earlier from a friendly at a suburban exchange didn't show matching state changes. They were noisy, ugly, and human, maintenance notes in the margin, a ring that never connected, exactly the stuff our parser filtered out by design. Human traffic piled in with grainy photos, small convoys peeling away from the big nodes our chart crowned. 2 worlds, same morning. And then the tell we'd hand-waved for months hit like a hammer. At 04:30 Berlin time, our calibration block, the trunks went glassy. Background hash flattened, edges turned surgical. The cleanest 10 minutes of the day. By 06:00, the echo windows, which nobody upstairs was allowed to say out loud, settled into those tight millisecond bands the SIS techs had warned about a year earlier. At 08:00, the brief cycle locked. Our day's truth froze right there, with the echo at its prettiest. But wait, there's more. At 10:15, just as field reports came in about dispersal, the tunnel feed doubled down. A second synchronized surge. Identical step heights, identical offsets. You think you know no real network does the same trick twice with that precision under load. Yet the chart matched yesterday's like a stencil. A junior analyst, the kind who still asks obvious questions, whispered, "Why does it look copy-pasted?" His lead said, "Focus on impact, not aesthetics." Impact landed in minutes. A scramble order moved assets into the wrong boxes. Air watched the corridors the chart crowned, not the capillaries the field swore by. A partner state, already twitchy, shifted posture on our call. Diplomatic lines heated quietly because posture changes ripple even when nobody admits they read from our book. It wasn't a public blunder. It was worse, a decision tree bent by a pretty lie. Inside, the memo war turned into a floor-to-floor sprint. The physics crew dragged in oscilloscope photos like crime scene shots. Fixed delay bumps at 3.7 milliseconds. Again. A phase drift that mapped perfectly to a rain squall the night before. Jitter bands narrowing right when Soviet lines went quiet for our calibration. The posture shop pushed back with the graph everyone loved. We can't throw out a feed with this track record mid-crisis. The skeptic's answer was a sentence nobody wanted to print. It's not track record, it's replication artifact. We tried a quick reconcile. Cross-sensor quorum, bring in a microwave intercept that sometimes caught command heartbeat. It showed chatter but not the elegant staircase. It looked like life, not ballet. Meanwhile, a liaison pushed switch house gossip. A maintenance window had been scheduled overnight. Perfectly normal, perfectly aligned with our validation block. Suddenly, the clean wasn't comfort, it was motive. Then something petty but devastating. A misfiled British note surfaced in a side drawer, stamped months earlier. Echo bands fixed under damp load likely to manifest as secondary switch events. It had a hand-drawn ladder with the exact step pattern our dashboards worshipped. Someone had initialed for line health only. The person who initialed it had been promoted on the strength of the tunnel's posture take. Leadership walked in tight-faced. Quiet blowback had already started. An ally staffer had asked, off record, why our picture always looked so neat. A domestic principal wanted to know why a scramble order had moved chess pieces toward decoys. The room didn't need a scapegoat, it needed a fuse. The review was forced. We called the exchange, requested a controlled outage, 30 seconds top. The answer came back, not possible during drill, which told us less about policy and more about who was watching our watch. So we did the next best thing, a latency sweep from our side. Micro-impulses on the tap, time the reflections, map the bands. The plots came back like a confession. Stable at 3.7 milliseconds, a secondary at 7.4. When we overlaid the SIR edges on that, the fit was exact. Our starts were riding our own shadow. Here's the twist. The Soviet lines went suspiciously healthy, exactly when it mattered most to our schedule. Not dead, healthy, like a stage reset between acts. The more perfect the physics looked to our tools, the more wrong the story got for our people. The drill didn't expose a rogue analyst or a bad algorithm. It exposed the wire. Outcome, the scramble stood down late. The political sting stayed quiet, but it strung. The internal call wasn't a victory lap. It was a throat clear, stop loving the chart, get into the cable. The crisis had finally pushed a hard look at the physics. Into the wire we go. Into the wire, the echo test. We locked the door, killed the phones, and dragged the problem onto a bench. No more posture notes, no more pretty charts, just copper, clay, and time. The lab smelled like flux and damp soil because someone actually brought in Berlin clay from a sealed drum. If the lie was living in the medium, we were going to build the medium. We started simple, paper-insulated twisted pairs under lead sheath, cut to match lengths from the tunnel survey. A tap bridge like the one underground, same coupling transformers, same attenuators, same ground bus routing. Then we added the sins we suspected. A slightly loose ground at the bridge, a few ohms of mismatch, and here the kicker, an unshielded segment laid near a deliberately moist bed tied to a stray return. Not sloppy, precise slop. The kind that looks like line quirks in a field note. First parts we fed a clean carrier and watched the scope. There it was, faint but steady, a bump riding in at a fixed delay just under 4 milliseconds. We tweaked moisture, remeasured, and the delay walked like we knew it would, longer with a longer wet path, tighter when we dried it out. Then we put the bridge back to spec, tightened the ground, and the echoes shrank. Loosen it again, stable bands came back like a tide. It felt less like discovery, and more like catching a thief we'd hired as a guard. Now the part nobody upstairs wanted to see. We replayed our own analyst pipeline against the bench output. Same sample windows, same threshold logic, same parser hunting for starts, holds, teardowns. We injected low-level impulses, below voice audibility, timed near the end of our sample windows. Let the reflection do the rest. The dashboard lit up. Ghost sessions spun into being, nodes connected, hierarchies sketched themselves. The tool wasn't failing, it was doing its job. We detrained it to clap for a shadow. A British engineer who'd written one of the early echo notes stood back, arms crossed, and just said, "There it is." He'd been filing cautions for a year, fixed delay replicas, predictable crosstalk windows, latency sweeps as a must. In compartment speak, his memos had been not germane to posture. On the bench, they were the script. We pushed harder. Could we map our surge, pattern from last week's drill with nothing but timing nudges? We set a metronome to our calibration block, then pulsed the carrier with tiny periodic taps that, when reflected, landed square in the parser's decision boundary. Step, 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 seizure, hold, teardown, stacked like stairs. Overlay that on the real event logs, and the fit was obscene. We weren't seeing the network. We were seeing our timing model echoing back at us. Here's the twist. The cleanest sequences our leaders loved mapped to the dirtiest echo conditions. We logged line health as we ran, moisture up, jitter down, ground floating, reflections stable. The prettier the physics looked to a naive eye, the more fertile the bed for ghosts. Our validation window, the one right before the morning briefs, was the worst time to trust anything. We didn't stop at copper. We rebuilt switch behavior from the era, ring generators, seizure relays, the expected transients, and showed how a mismatch turned natural ringing into neat secondary edges. In a healthy line, those edges are mush. In our bench monster, they were surgical. The parser loved surgical. It rewarded sharpness and penalized smear, so it kept the lie and threw away the truth. Then we did the thing we should have done on day one in Berlin, controlled outages and latency sweeps. Kill the line for a heartbeat, fire microimpulses, measure round-trip delays, build a reflection profile. The bands came back like fingerprints. First at 3.7 milliseconds, second at 7.4, a faint third we'd never have seen in the field because our windows clipped it. We took a week of archived, perfect data, stamped those bands across it, and the coincidences lined up too often to be chance. The ghost wasn't random. It was structured by our own hardware sins. Meanwhile, someone cracked open an old compartment and pulled the buried British paper, early SIS tech note on echo bands in damp media. It didn't mince words. Stable, fixed delay replicas may appear as secondary switch events to naive parsers. Recommend latency sweeps, controlled outages, and cross-sensor quorum before trusting pattern claims. That sentence could have saved a year. Instead, it sat in a folder labeled methods. Unknown to the lab crew, analysts upstairs ran a parallel test. They fed our bench ghosts into live tools without telling the tools the source. The dashboards drew the same elegant hierarchies they briefed to principals. Then they flipped to a microwave take from a separate intercept that sometimes caught command heartbeats. The microwave said, "Chatter here, silence there." Nothing like the staircase. 2 sensors. One saw ballet, one saw life. We closed the loop the only way that mattered, field replication. A quiet partner exchange agreed to a midnight window. We asked for 3 things: a 30-second dead drop, a series of microimpulses, and a dampening of load to mimic healthy lines. They complied. Our taps saw the bands lock, the edges sharpen, and like clockwork, the parser spun ghost sessions during the healthiest minute of the night. When the exchange brought load back, the ghosts got messy and many vanished. The lie hated real life. Here's the twist you can't unsee once you've seen it. The cleanest data periods, the ones everyone trusted, mapped to the exact conditions that make echo artifacts most believable. We found the bug. Therefore, the past was suspect. We walked the plots upstairs. No spin, no metaphor, just fingerprints and overlays. The room went quiet the way rooms do when they realize they've been reading a mirror as a map. The question wasn't, is there an echo, anymore. It was, how wide is the blast radius? Counting the cost, the 4 trillion ripple. So now we ask the ugly question, what did the echo actually cost? Not one budget line. A ripple, decades of choices nudged by pretty lies, compounding into a tab nobody wanted to total. Here, where things get interesting, money follows belief, and belief followed those perfect graphs. Start with posture. When your map shows massing, you posture forward. That means permanent bases, alert crews, fuel caches, munitions pre-positioned, and the staff layers to sustain it. Each imminent surge that never was still moved real airplanes, stood up real brigades, and burned real hours. Those aren't one-off spikes, they become habits. Habits have maintenance tails. Then the gaps. The bomber gap, the missile gap. Those panic cycles weren't born in the tunnel, but the tunnel's too clean traffic patterns amplified them. If your metadata paints synchronized readiness up and down a hierarchy, you don't argue for gradual upgrades, you argue for leaps. So money pours into fast answers. More reconnaissance, more early warning, more reach. Satellites leap from concept to constellation because a cable under Berlin told a story of ballet smooth command. Ground arrays get built to triangulate hierarchy nodes the Echo crown. Each purchase justifies the next. Procurement isn't isolated, it cascades. Think about satellites. An image from space is never because of a tunnel on a form, but the appetite for coverage comes from somewhere. The tunnel's certainty trained leaders to want global certainty. You want eyes on every node your call graphs drew. So you fund birds with wider swathes, tighter revisit times, better downlinks. You build stations to talk to them, networks to move the data, analysis shops to package it on time. None of it is fake tech. All of it is sized by a map, drawn in millisecond steps. Meanwhile, SIGINT arrays multiply. If ghosts dance this clean on copper, you assume there are other ballets to catch. Microwave dishes, over-the-horizon radars, ocean-spanning cables to hoover everything for pattern. The logic seems sound. If metadata is the truest layer, build the world's best metadata machine. The Echo's trick is that it doesn't fight you on that. It encourages the spend, because the more you believe the pattern layer, the more you'll size your force to chase patterns the adversary can sculpt. And then the human cost, which never shows up in glossy decks. Overconfident tasking roles networks. A source gets pushed because the dashboard says a corridor is safe or a node is ripe. When on the ground the dispersal is real and the decoys are bait, arrests follow. A rumor starts. The tunnel product is gold, so dissent sounds like excuse-making. Burn rates climb. Recruiters get jumpy. Case officers get conservative in all the wrong ways. Protect the feed, spend the people. Every bad call is defended by a chart. Here's the twist. Policy choices compound like interest. $1 billion today to cover a ghost becomes 10 over a decade because you maintain it, upgrade it, and restructure around it. Staff billets created to brief, insightful certainty don't go away, they proliferate. Training pipelines bend to serve the machine. Universities build programs to feed the pipelines. You think you're buying steel and glass, you're buying culture. Frame a number, not a receipt, a method. Take the 195s through the 198s, the heart of the build-out era. Stack posture costs that were justified by consistent traffic shaping indicative of readiness. Add procurement cascades. Satellites sized for global certainty, SIGINT arrays scaled for hierarchy mapping, bases and logistics built to answer synchronized surges. Layer R&D forks chosen to chase clean patterns. Things like scheduler timing exploits in later digital nets because Berlin proved timing tells truth. Then add the cost of failure. Rolled networks, compromised assets, operations greenlit on bad maps that had to be rescued, reworked, or buried. Spread that over allied systems we nudge to copy our playbook. You don't get a neat ledger, you get a compounding function. 4 trillion isn't a single check. It's the sum of thousands of rational decisions made inside a false frame. Each choice looks small, smart even when you trust the feed. One more bird to close the revisit gap. One more station to keep the pipeline hot. One more brigade forward because the staircase pattern is back. Multiply by years, by theaters, by copy-pasted doctrine. The Echo didn't steal money. It redirected momentum. Momentum is more expensive than steel. And the worst bill is cultural. When clean charts outrank muddy human reports for a generation, you teach a profession to prefer the screen to the street. Metrics worship takes root. Dashboards beat dirt. Compartment walls harden because sources of truth must be protected from messy context. Careers grow on certainty delivered on schedule. Breakers, the people who ask to autopsy the sensor, become awkward. That culture keeps spending even after the tunnel is shuttered, because the habit isn't a cable, it's a reflex. Unknown to them across agencies, the Echo's rule set quietly migrates. Later systems inherit the same bias. Validate physics last, pattern first. Digital nets bring new echoes. Timing jitter, buffer artifacts, scheduler heartbeats. Perfect traffic shows up again in theaters that shouldn't be that tidy, and the machine nods, we've seen this before, which is exactly the problem. The Berlin mirror lives on in other glass. So when someone says, come on, 4 trillion, ask them to zoom out, ask them to price momentum. Price every procurement justified by synchronized hierarchies that read like ballet. Price the bases that answer ghosts. Price the satellites built to stare at nodes the Echo invented. Price the people burned because a dashboard won an argument with a report. Then add the interest, the upgrades, the copycats, the pride. Numbers are ugly. The culture bill is worse, and it lingers. Culture of certainty. Why smart people missed it. Inside those rooms, certainty wasn't just a mood, it was a deliverable. Dashboards with tight fonts, staircase plots framed like art. You think you know, but here's the twist. The culture made the chart the boss. Metrics worship set in deep. If your product hit the morning book on time with clean hierarchies, you were winning. Muddy field notes, human mess, those were context, which is a polite word for optional. Analysts lived by numbers that could be counted. Throughput, timeliness, impact citations in principals briefings. An elegant graph beat a paragraph of caveats every time. The machine paid you to be sure, not to be right. Here's where things get interesting. When an organization optimizes for certainty on schedule, it quietly demotes verification. Physics checks take time. Time slips metrics. So the stopwatch drove the science, not the other way around. Compartmentalization did its own damage. Need to know protected sources and methods, sure, but it also killed cross-pollination. The line health, folks saw fixed delay replicas. The posture, folks saw synchronized surges. Different rooms, different clearances, different bosses. A memo about echo bands died 3 doors shy of the map room. That's not a conspiracy, that's plumbing. But it works like a conspiracy when the missing pipe connects suspicion to power. Career risk sealed it. There's no bonus for breaking the golden feed. There's risk, though, political, professional, for questioning the flagship product in front of people who have built posture and budgets on it. So smart people self-edited. They sanded off the hard edges. Anomalies noted, monitoring, became the brave version of this smells wrong. A young analyst learns fast. Protect your lane, don't torch the road. Cognitive traps did the rest. Metadata is truth felt modern. It wore math like armor. People told themselves, content lies, people lie, but timing doesn't. That's the glow. Numbers feel like granite. You can stack decisions on granite. Except timing can lie when the sensor is bent, and the sensor can be bent by the ground it sits in. The paradox is simple. To trust the numbers, you have to distrust them first. Now layer on politics. Leaders love graphs that say we know. They hate fog. Fog doesn't brief. Fog doesn't move alliances. Fog doesn't pass budgets. So the ask comes down clean. Give us certainty on schedule. The glide path writes itself. If the dashboard delivers that clean, rhythmic story, keep feeding it. If the physics memo threatens the story, bury it under methods. Not because anyone orders a burial, because the machine rewards sugar over fiber. Here's the twist. Everyone in the loop was competent. Engineers worked miracles underground. Analysts wrote tight, careful prose. Liaison officers fought to keep allies looped. No villains, just incentives. The system tilted toward the output it could defend in a room. A tidy hierarchy with tight timing that looked like doctrine. A scope shot of a 3-7 millisecond bump in damp clay doesn't play as well to a cabinet minister. Meanwhile, the skeptics weren't saints either. Some overreached, pitching physics with absolutism of their own. If echoes exist, throw it all out, and lost credibility. Others buried their cautions in jargon so dense a director could slide right past. Communication is part of culture. If your warning needs a chalkboard, it dies at the doorway. Pattern hunger made it worse. Once the tool drew one perfect command tree, the eye kept finding cousins in every dataset. It's a thing brains do, pareidolia, but for org charts. And the parser helped, hard coding sampling windows and thresholds that loved sharp edges. A culture that equates repeatability with truth can't see when it's repeating its own bias. Trust the process became a mantra, and here's where it gets wild. The process assumed honesty in the sensor. We validated the model with the same windows that made the echo most stable. Health checks ran when Soviet lines were suspiciously clean. We called that prudence. It was preening. The mirror looked good, so the mirror was good. Compartment walls hardened around pride. The tunnel had become a calling card in budget fights. Our unique insight opened doors. Dissent then wasn't just technical, it was tribal. Push too hard and you weren't just wrong, you were off-brand. So pushback came wrapped in diplomacy. Recommend further study. Propose exploratory team. No one said the blunt line, "We're briefing a ghost." And because culture copies itself, the echo mindset migrated. Microwave intercept shops built dashboards with the same glow. Satellite tasking cells got addicted to daily certainty slides, even when clouds and orbits begged for humility. New digital nets brought buffer jitter, scheduler heartbeats, packet padding, fresh echoes in new clothes. The old lesson, verify the physics first, never made it into the training deck. The wrong rule did. If the pattern is elegant, it's real. So why did smart people miss it? Because the system paid them to. Because walls kept the right fights from happening in the right rooms. Because math glow beat messy stories. Because politics demanded clarity on a schedule reality didn't want to keep. Because nobody wants to be the person who pulls the fire alarm on a cathedral they helped build. Plot twist, the KGB timed the finale. Their public discovery in 1956 wasn't the humiliation, the managed discovery was. They let us keep the culture while they took the tunnel. We lost hardware. We kept the habit. And habits are harder to break than concrete. The reveal, staged discovery, managed humiliation. They chose a Saturday. Mud still wet, lights placed for drama, microphones ready. Soviet engineers in greatcoats led Western reporters down a trench like tour guides at a crime museum. Cameras lingered on the tap bay, the meticulous racks, the felt-lined panels meant to kill reflections. A colonel pointed with a gloved finger and said the only line that mattered. They had found a Western tunnel under socialist soil. Nobody mentioned millisecond echoes. They didn't need to. The humiliation would right itself. Here's where things get interesting. They'd known for months, years, if you count Blake's first briefings, but the timing of the discovery felt theatrical. The drill that broke our trust had just closed. Our internal echo tests weren't public. Our leadership needed space to manage the fallout. Moscow gave us none. They invited the world to see our hardware and quietly to miss the real trick. The sensor we'd been trained to worship could be steered by the ground it sat in. The narrative control was clean. State media cast it as vigilance. The KGB had patiently detected, documented, and exposed an imperialist tunnel. Officials walked reporters past labeled artifacts, cables, splices, transformers, like a curated exhibit. Shots lingered on coffee cups and cigarette butts in the tap room, human clutter that said, look how comfortable the trespassers had grown. They let the story be about audacity and violation, not about how they'd used our audacity to teach us to love a lie. From our side, spin kicked in fast. The CIA stressed voice content value, hours of encrypted conversations, order of battle hints, texture of command. Significant take, the line went. Worth the risk. Metadata doubts stayed sealed. We told allies the tunnel had yielded insights that justified the operation, then buried any talk about echoes under layers of classification and methods stamps. The point wasn't to lie. It was to keep the flagship myth afloat, while we scrambled inside the compartments to rewire the workflow. British voices, more careful, emphasized tradecraft and partnership. They acknowledged a hit, praised the engineers, and leaned on that quiet SIS tone that says we'll learn and move on. In closed rooms, some of those same engineers were hauling oscilloscope prints and latency sweeps to anyone who would listen. In public, nobody wanted to explain impedance to Parliament. What nobody knew at the podiums was that the culture had already chosen which lesson to keep. We cut the Berlin line, we boxed the gear, we logged the loss. Then the brief cadence resumed, new targets, new feeds, same hunger for clean hierarchies on schedule. Lessons learned made it into after-action binders, but the habit rode forward, pattern first, physics later. The tunnel was gone, the mirror stayed. Meanwhile in Moscow, the theater kept paying dividends. Domestically, the KGB looked omniscient, patient guardians revealing a foreign plot at the moment of maximum narrative impact. Internationally, they cast us as clever but clumsy, the kind of opponent who thinks microphones are magic. It's a small humiliation that grows with retelling. The West, proud of its science, undone by a ground loop in wet clay. Here's the twist. Even the reveal was managed for effect. The trench was open enough to show the story, not so open that a Western engineer could point at the exact splice and say, there's the mismatch. Camera angles hugged the spectacle. Reporters got quotes, not time. The KGB didn't need to hide the physics. They needed to avoid giving us a second shot at explaining it away. Leave us with embarrassment, not a teachable diagram. Inside Langley, narrative management turned inward. Senior briefers framed the event as a one-off exposure of a bold operation. Costly, yes, but valuable in ways we couldn't share. The metadata questions stayed in rooms with no windows. A handful of people pushed for structural fixes. Embed physics early, mandate latency sweeps, set cross-sensor quorum before posture. But production didn't stop. The morning book still needed pages. The charts still needed steps. And that's when it gets wild. While everyone stared at the Berlin hole, the echo thinking migrated. Countermeasures sprouted wherever we could see the adversary, and the adversary could see us seeing them. Microwave relays learned to breathe on our sampling windows. Later, in digital nets, scheduler heartbeats and buffer jitter gave us new, tidy tells that looked like doctrine when they were really timing artifacts. The rule we should have carved into stone, verify the physics first, never became culture. The wrong lesson did. If it draws clean, you can brief it. Back in Berlin, the physical aftermath was simple. Crews dismantled the tap bay. Racks disappeared into crates, destined for depots where secrets go to sleep. The tunnel flooded on purpose, that old clay finally winning. Photos of the operation were stamped and filed. The people moved on to other rooms with other feeds. The habit came with them. A small micro-story to pin it to a person. The British engineer who'd written the first Echo memo went home the night of the reveal, sat at his kitchen table, and drew the same ladder he'd drawn a year earlier, 3, 7, 7.4, the faint third, and underlined a sentence, "Never trust a clean edge you didn't make." He taped it above his desk. Years later, in a different theater, he'd point to it when a young analyst showed him a perfect staircase in a new medium. The managed humiliation did its job. We were busy defending the value of the past while the future copied the flaw. The adversary timed the exit on their clock, not ours. We lost a tunnel. We kept a taste for mirrors. The echo pattern, from cables to satellites. Here's where things get interesting. Once you see the Berlin mirror, you start spotting its cousins everywhere. The medium lets timing masquerade as meaning. Copper gave us millisecond echoes. Other systems gave us new ghosts with cleaner clothes. Microwave relays first. Those big dishes hopping voice and command across line-of-sight links in the 1960s and 1970s. They breathed. Thermal sway nudged oscillators. Multipath off-terrain threw delayed copies back into the receiver. Under light load, the scheduler that doled out time slots settled into neat heartbeats. Edge detectors loved those beats. You think you know, busy equals intent, but the link was just keeping time with itself. Intelsat-era birds looked like a break from all that. Space should be pure, right? Plot twist. Geostationary or not, the path still jitters. Ground stations share transponders with fixed framing. Buffers fill and drain. Under the right traffic shape, packet padding snaps to a rhythm that looks like doctrine. Start, hold, teardown, perfectly aligned with our sampling windows. We called it high discipline. It was a scheduler saying, "I'm bored." Digital switches in the late 1970s and 1980s made it worse because they sounded more like math. TDM frames, PCM slots, later packetization. So many chances for the medium to print a heartbeat. If you set your parser to reward sharp edges and repeatable intervals, you'll get promoted by a switch that keeps its own house too well. Healthy nets under light load look like staff drills. And here's the twist. The adversary can see you seeing it. If they can see the sensor, they can feed it. That's the principle Moscow wrote in pencil under Berlin and inked later. Visibility equals vulnerability. The day your opponent can predict your sampling windows, calibration blocks, and alarm thresholds, your sensor stops being a window and starts being an input port. They don't need to push content. They nudge timing. Packet padding swells just before your cut. Maintenance windows land on your validation hour. Multipath gets cleaned when you run line health. You clap on cue, and the cue is theirs. We started noticing a pattern we didn't want to name. In theaters where we should have seen chaos, civil conflict, contested logistics, whether that hates electronics, we kept drawing clean ladders. Undersea cable monitors flagged, coordinated bursts, that lined up with data center maintenance in our time zones. Satellite constellations delivered too perfect revisit correlations, as if adversary units respected our orbit tables. Microwave nets breathed in synchronized ways during our nightly ingest. Different mediums, same feeling. The prettiest data wore the dirtiest physics. Parallels jumped out if you'd lived inside the tunnel. Timing jitter in digital nets played the role of wet clay. Buffer artifacts stood in for ground loops. Scheduler heartbeats wore the crown that fixed delay echoes used to wear. And our habits traveled too. Health checks ran when adversary operators could guess we'd be validating. Sampling windows stayed fixed long enough to become targets. Outlier rules kept sanding off the only warning signs that something human and messy was trying to wave at us from the edge of the graph. Here's the twist. None of this says the take was useless. Voice still carried texture. Images still caught trucks in the wrong valley. But when we elevated pattern over physics, we flipped our order of trust. We let the echo, whatever form it took, become the spine of the story and made every other sensor play catch up. That's how compound errors get born. One clean staircase recruits a satellite, which recruits a task force, which recruits a budget. The mirror becomes a plan. Principle then, not a slogan. If the adversary can see your sensor, they can feed it always. See doesn't just mean physically locate, it means infer your rhythm. They don't need your code, they need your clock, and clocks are loud. Our ingest cycles leave marks. Our validation hours leave gaps. Our upgrades leave signatures on the air. The smarter the system, the more regular the heartbeat. Regular beats are the easiest to sing along to. So write the rule of ops we should have carved after Berlin. Verify the physics, then the pattern, never the other way around. Break the sensor on purpose before you trust it. Force the medium to confess. Latency sweeps, controlled outages, scheduled ugliness. Cross-sensor quorum before posture. If microwave says ballet and imagery says mud, the ballet sits on the bench. If a scheduler heartbeat explains a surge, the surge goes to parking. And change your windows, randomize, hide your clock. We took that rule into newer fights, and when we remembered it, the ghosts got shy. A digital net that used to draw perfect command trees turned squishy when we jittered our sample cadence. A satellite correlation that used to sing fell apart and we moved the brief by 6 hours. A microwave surge vanished when a partner ran maintenance out of our night. Each time, the pretty picture faded when the mirror couldn't catch our timing. Each time, a human report we'd sidelined suddenly fit better than the chart. And that's the lesson that keeps stinging. Berlin wasn't a relic, it was a prototype. The echo's face keeps changing. Copper, microwave, satellite, packet, different toys, same trap. If you don't lead with physics, someone else will lead you with it. The checklist, beating ghost metadata. So after Berlin, you need a way to keep your sensor from turning into an input port, not a philosophy, an ops checklist. Here, where things get interesting. The order matters. Physics first, then pattern, then intent. If you flip that, you're feeding the echo. Start with the source triad. 1. Physics check. What is the medium doing to you right now? Map impedance, jitter, latency, noise floor, and environmental drift. If you can't describe the channel in numbers you measured this week, you don't know your sensor. 2. Adversary intent check. If they can see your clock, assume they'll sing to it. What incentives do they have to shape what you think you see? 3. Incentive check on our side. Who gets promoted for throughput? Who gets punished for autopsies? If the culture pays for pretty charts, your sensor is already bent. Now the echo test. Inject and observe is the starter. Push microimpulses just below content audibility and watch for fixed delay replicas. If bumps land at neat offsets, you've got fertile soil for ghosts. Next, latency sweeps. Vary delays on purpose. Change cable lengths in the lab. Change sampling cadence in the field. And plot reflection bands. Fixed bands that lock under healthy conditions are a red flag. Controlled outages are non-negotiable. Kill the line for a heartbeat at prearranged times that your adversary can't predict. If your surge patterns love those windows, the mirror's working you. Finally, cross-sensor quorum rules. No single sensor gets to define posture. You need 2 independent physics, say microwave and imagery, or 1 physics plus human with chain of custody. If quorum fails, the pattern sits on ice. Analyst hygiene is next. Red team the dataset first, not the conclusion. A rotating skeptic cell should live inside the pipeline with veto power over tool tuning. Their job is to try to break the feed before the feed breaks you. They run blind source tests, bench ghosts into live parsers without labels, and publish how often the tool applauds shadows. They randomize sampling windows and report what collapses. And they write their notes in plain language. This ladder matches a buffer heartbeat, not a quasi-periodic artifact was observed. Culture fixes make the checklist stick. Reward falsification. Put a line on performance reviews. What sensor assumption did you test and kill this quarter? Celebrate autopsies. Postmortems where teams walk through how a feed fooled them and how they changed the build. Demote throughput worship. A beautiful chart that survives no physics check should burn your metrics, not earn them. And embed physics where the maps get drawn. Line health techs sit in posture rooms. Posture writers sit in the lab when latency sweeps run. Break the silo that killed Berlin. Kill switches are the safety rails. Pre-agree criteria that pause collection or freeze product until retraining finishes. Examples: a new fixed delay band appears. Validation windows correlate with adversary maintenance. Two perfect sequences repeat with stencil precision. Cross-sensor quorum fails twice. When a kill switch trips, nobody has to beg up the chain. The system pauses itself. Production misses a day. That's cheaper than briefing a ghost. Here's the twist. Timing discipline has to be an OPSEC plan, not an afterthought. Hide your clock. Randomize sampling cadence within safe bounds so an adversary can't aim at your windows. Rotate validation hours so healthy lines don't always line up with your morning book. Vary calibrations and never announce maintenance in patterns. If your ingest beats like a drum, expect a marching band. Field drills make the paper real. Run mirror hunts quarterly. Pick a live feed. Without warning, the skeptic cell jitters sampling, schedules a surprise outage with a trusted partner, and injects bench ghosts into tools to measure false positive hunger. Then write a one-page lesson in short words and pin it in the posture room. Repeat in a new medium, copper microwave packet. Now operational rules of thumb. If a pattern draws cleaner under lighter load, suspect scheduler artifacts. If surges, respect your workday, suspect narrative management, yours or theirs. If a staircase repeats with copy-paste precision during stress, suspect replication artifacts or echo bands. If imagery says mud while timing says ballet, believe the mud. If a human report with photos fights a graph, stall the graph and escalate the fight. Build a physics pre-brief. Before any big take gets near principle, someone stands up with 4 slides. Channel map, impedance, latency, drift, validation log, when and how we broke the sensor, quorum tally, which independent sensors agree, and adversary visibility, how they could see our clock. No physics pre-brief, no posture slide. Make it boring, make it mandatory. Train for this like tradecraft. New analysts should bench build a bad line, watch ghost sessions bloom, and then kill them with latency sweeps. They should see a scheduler heartbeat masquerade as doctrine and feel the embarrassment early. Put never trust a clean edge you didn't make on the wall. Explain it in a story before you draw it in a chart. And for leadership, 1 promise and 1 ask. Promise, we'll bring fewer pretty lies if you buy us time to break our toys first. Ask, stop paying for certainty on a timer. Pay for sensors we can prove we've tried to fool. The echo feeds on schedules and pride. Starve it with randomness and humility. Last line of the checklist, the one you circle. Verify the physics, then the pattern, never the other way around. If the adversary can see your sensor, they can feed it. Don't give them your clock. Don't brief their song. Transformation, from faith to forensics. So here's the turn. After Berlin, the people who stayed changed their religion. The shrine wasn't the dashboard anymore. It was the sensor on a bench you could break with your own hands. Faith gave way to forensics. The first shift was personal. Analysts who'd grown up chasing elegant ladders started asking dumb, physical questions before opening a tool. What's the medium doing to me today? Is the clock clean? Who can see my cadence? They stopped treating validation like a box stick and started treating it like tradecraft. If they couldn't explain the channel in plain words, they didn't brief. Here's where things get interesting. Embeds became standard. Line health techs sat inside posture shops. Posture writers rotated through the lab. The person who tuned an outlier rule had to watch a latency sweep and call a kill switch with their own name on it. That changed tone in the room. You don't worship a graph after you've seen it applaud a shadow you made. The build process flipped. Physics checks led, not lagged. Before a new feed went hot, a skeptic cell red-teamed it, injects, sweeps, window jitter. If the tool cheered ghosts, it got retrained. If it couldn't be retrained, it got parked. Cross-sensor quorum moved from nice to have to no quorum, no posture. Humaned with photos plus a second physics beat a lone staircase every time. Culture followed, slowly but for real. Throughput worship lost points. Performance reviews asked, what assumption did you kill? Weekly stand-up started with a boring slide, impedance, latency, drift, and what changed since last week. A director learned to ask, when did you last break this sensor? And to frown if the answer wasn't recent. The glow moved from pretty to proven. Now remember, this wasn't purity. The machine still had to deliver, so they built timing discipline into OPSEC. Sampling windows got randomized within safe bounds. Validation blocks rotated. Maintenance stopped landing on cue. Partners learned to run outages on our offbeat, not our prime time. We stopped giving away the drum solo. And that's when it gets wild. The moment we hit our clock, some too perfect patterns fell apart on contact. A digital net that had drawn a crisp command tree for months turned mushy when the cadence jittered. A satellite correlation that looked like doctrine dissolved when briefs moved 6 hours and revisit timing missed the echo. Microwave surges vanished when a partner did maintenance out of our night. Clean edges we didn't make started confessing themselves. Institutionally, silos softened. Compartments stayed, for good reasons, but doors cracked open at the seams that mattered. Methods memos didn't die in tech folders. Physics notes walked into posture meetings by rule, and posture people, in turn, sat on the floor during bench tests and asked, show me the bump. That crosstalk didn't make everyone friends. It made them accountable. Here's the twist. The biggest payoff wasn't fewer mistakes. It was faster loops. When a feed smelled wrong, the team could kill it, test it, and either bring it back clean or bury it without 2 months of memo wars. OODA tightened. Tasking got sharper. Fewer heroic rescues. Fewer quiet apologies to partners. More small course corrections before budgets and ops drifted around a ghost. Personally, some people needed a new motto. The British engineers' line made the wall, never trust a clean edge you didn't make. Young analysts built a bad line on day one, watched ghost sessions bloom, then killed them with latency sweeps. They left the lab with a scar, which is the point. The first time a tidy staircase tried to seduce them in the wild, they had an itch they'd learned to trust. Strategically, the payoff was expensive to earn and cheap to keep. We spent time up front to save money downstream, fewer trillion-dollar mirages, fewer procurement cascades chasing ballet that lived in a buffer. We put physics first and let pattern earn its way back into the room. Final reframe, the one you take with you. Metadata is a weapon. It cuts both ways. If you own the blade, you can shape how your adversary sees you. If you don't respect the blade, you'll shave your own map until it looks like their plan. Measurement is the mission. Everything else is theater. So write it on the door. Verify the physics, then the pattern. Hide your clock. Reward the person who breaks the toy before the toy breaks you. From faith to forensics, that's the only way the mirror stops winning. One loose ground turned intelligence into theater and budgets into smoke. Clean ladders on paper, bad calls in the real world. If you want more hidden truth breakdowns that start at the wire, subscribe and turn on alerts. We cut through dashboards and go straight to the sensor. Share this with the one person in your shop who trusts pretty charts more than muddy boots. Then watch our next one, Plot Twist. A printer's microdot almost rewrote a war plan, and the proof was hiding in the margins. Question what your sensors are telling you every time.